Hey y'all, welcome back to Rope Trotting, and today we're going to talk about comparing elections in the US and Denmark. Now, at the time of recording, we're just 2 weeks away from major elections in both countries, so it's the perfect time for us to sit down and put our civics lessons to good use and talk about the differences between elections in the two countries.
Yeah, so the first thing we'll talk about is Election Day. And looking first at the United States, we can pretty much tell you when every election day is going to be for eternity, or if the US lasts that long. At least for the rest of our lifetime, we can confidently tell you that elections will be held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November every 2 years. And that's just how things are done in the United States.
Yeah. Denmark is a little bit more complicated because all parliaments are dictated by 4-year terms, but they can call elections early in that time. So, for example, the election in 2022 didn't have to happen until June of 2023, but they called the election early and it will be in early November of 22.
Yeah, and in the United States, election season itself seems to go on forever. So, for example, we have this year what we call midterm elections. These are the ones that are the 2 years in between a president's 4-year term. And already people are talking about the presidential election that won't be happening for another 2 years. So it really seems like there's just always a constant campaign. Not to mention that the House of Representatives in the United States is up for re-election every 2 years. So literally they are being run through an election for their seat every 2 years. And essentially they just never stop fundraising, campaigning, and trying to get elected. And I guess maybe they govern a little bit in between.
A little bit. On paper in Denmark, it seems like election season is only 30 days long. I mean, they called the election, you put the headshot posters up, and that's it. But I gotta say, in Denmark, election season started long ago. I mean, they already had a debate between the 3 prime minister candidates before an election was even called, and there have been people jockeying for positions basically since the last election was held in 2019. So while Danes may say their election season is shorter, I can say living here, it feels like it doesn't end here either.
I still have to say, I really don't quite get it because the entire country can throw an election in 30 days. Yet my Danish friends are basically booked until 3 or 4 months ahead. So I don't know how they made that work, but good on you.
Now, what are you doing in week 44? Throwing a national election.
Okay, but who actually gets to vote and how do they make that happen? So in the United States, it's a little bit different than what happens in Denmark. In the US, we actually have to register to vote. You can do that once you turn 18, and basically all you will do is either go online or fill out a form in person, get that form submitted, and then you get a voter registration card. And every state is a little bit different in how they run their elections, but essentially you do have to register to vote. We don't have an automatic or compulsory voting. You're not automatically registered. You do have to do that yourself. Now, in the 90s, a law was drafted that made it a little bit easier for people to vote, and it kind of got the nickname motor voter because you can actually renew or update or change or register for the first time every time you renew your driver's license at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So that makes it a little bit easier for Americans to vote. But what about Denmark?
So everything that Derek just said probably blew the minds of Danes, including having to update your registration for your driver's license. In Denmark, it's pretty simple. 1, are you eligible to vote? 2, do you have an address in Denmark? 3, you get a card in the mail telling you where you can go vote. That's it. Pretty simple.
Yeah, and in the Kommune and the regional elections that were held recently, that's exactly what happened with us. We got our voter card in the mail and basically went to take our vote card to the address that was on the vote card, and we voted. Pretty simple, and it's kind of nice that it's just done for you.
So with all those differences in there, how about how many people actually go and turn out to vote? Well, in the last election in 2020, the US had a voter turnout of about 67%, but the year before in the Danish election it was 85%. So point to you, Denmark.
Sure, and there's a lot of reasons why there tends to be a little bit of apathy in American voters. Part of that is because of our elections and the fact that if you live in a very Democrat-heavy area of the country, say New York City, you may not be inclined to go vote if you're a Republican because you're most likely going to be represented in Congress by a Democrat. And the same if you're a Democrat living in a very rural or very Republican-rich area of the country, like say Montana. You may not be super excited to go vote because voting for a Democrat there may not make much of a difference. So a lot of kind of voter apathy. Now, when it comes to how you're represented in government, the United States does it a little bit more complicated than Denmark. We basically vote for everything. I guess we just love having the ability to vote for even jobs that seem like they're not that important, like say the county clerk or the township commissioner. You know, we literally vote for all of these positions at some level. And the big ones that most people know about, especially in Denmark, would be that every 4 years we have a presidential election on the federal level. We also vote for our representations in federal in Congress. So that would be 2 senators for every state. They serve 6-year terms, and they rotate with a third of the Senate being up for election every 2 years. And as we already said, every 2 years, your representative in the lower house, the House of Representatives, will be selected. They serve a 2-year term. And then beyond that, at the state level, at the local level, at the county level, at the township level, you have all kinds of other elections that are basically scheduled with sometimes on the same calendar as the federal elections and sometimes on slightly different voting periods.
Yeah, in Denmark, it's a little bit more simple than that. You basically have 3 levels. You have the federal level, and then you have the municipal and regional levels that have offsetting voting periods on them. The municipal ones fixed every 4 years. And as we said, the Folketing, it's up at a maximum of 4 years, but it can be dissolved early if it needs to as well. So a little bit more simple in that direction. And then most of the positions end up being held by whoever forms the government. So they can decide who's going to run the finances or the education part based on who won the election, who got that ministry or that area of focus for the commune or the region.
Okay, so how are seats determined in the United States? So as described, every state has 2 senators, no matter the size or population of the state. And it's kind of simple. Everything else is basically determined by geography. So every state will be divided up into districts based on its population. And each district will have 1 representative in the lower house of Congress or the House of Representatives. And at that point, you may already know this, but the maps that are drawn tend to get done rather unfairly in many instances, and you can have a situation where between Democrats and Republicans, a state may end up having about 50-50 as far as the voting is concerned, but the districts, because they can be drawn with all kinds of weird lines, can end up having a situation where one party in a state that has maybe 10 seats, one party has 3 and the other has 7. And it's really weird. It's based because of how they draw those maps and because of the fact that we have a first over the line or winner take all kind of system.
Yeah, Denmark, it's a little bit more proportional. There's basically 2 different ways that the different mandates or seats come out. So in the Folketing, there's 175 seats for Denmark proper. Of them, 135 come out proportionally. Basically, the country is divided into 10 different districts. Each district has a certain number of mandates within there, and then it's proportionally allotted out based on the performance of the parties within each of those voting districts. Then there's 40 more seats that are saved for some sort of leveling up. Basically what it does is it's proportionally allocated at the total national level to make sure it's more or less fair, and also making sure that every party above 2% nationally gets at least 1 mandate in the Folketing as well. Plus you get 4 more seats, 2 for the Faroe Islands and 2 for Greenland, for 179 total.
So in the United States, when you actually determine and form a government, it's a bit more simple than the Danish method. Essentially, if you win more seats in the Senate and in the House, you win that entire chamber of Congress and you elect a majority leader for the House, a majority leader for the Senate. And of course, that has nothing to do with the president or how the president is elected. That one's a bit more complicated.
Yeah, and if you've seen any of our videos on working in Denmark, you understand that no decision in Denmark can be taken without some sort of meeting, and that's how it goes in Denmark. Essentially, whoever more or less wins on election night is going to have the Queen ask them to try to form a government. This begins what's known as the Queen's Round, where you have negotiations between the various parties to build a coalition. This is because in Denmark, almost never will a single party have a majority by themselves. They have to form a coalition. Usually this takes 1 or 2 weeks. The last time around in 2019, it took 20 days, which was the longest it's been in several decades. But basically, as they go through these discussions, each party comes with their list of demands or requirements. They horse trade a little bit, decide if there's going to be ministries that are shared or they're going to support a single party government. And then out of that, finally, the new prime minister comes out and tells the Queen a government's been formed and asks for their blessing to start running the government.
And if that confuses you at all, just watch the first 2 episodes of Borgen Season 1 and you'll be right on page with everybody else. So how do things actually get done? You know, laws being passed, checks and balances, that kind of thing. In the US, it's a bit more complicated. I would say it's maybe even not as efficient as it is in Denmark. Part of the reason is because you really have two parties that are at odds with each other. You may have a president of a different party than in Congress, and you have various ways that bills have to get passed. And without getting too in the weeds with that process, I think we can just point out that there are a lot more veto points and there are a lot more things that can impede bills from being turned into law in the United States compared to the system that's in Denmark. There's a lot more veto points. We have something called the filibuster, which is a rule that says that if one person doesn't like something in the Senate, you need 60 out of the 100 senators to agree on the bill or the law to move past that legislation. And that can make things really complicated, especially with American politics. But what about in Denmark?
Yeah, Denmark's a little bit more simple. I mean, once the government is formed, they have control of the Folketing. Generally, it means that they'll be able to get their agenda through. There may still be some negotiations to get bills passed, but simple majority, and you're able to have your bill become a law, generally. You also find fewer veto points in Denmark. I mean, you do have the different levels of government at the regional and the communal level, but they typically have powers that are reserved for more executing government. They run the healthcare, they run the schools and things like that. And so you don't find as many differences between the different regions and communities in general as you would in the US, where you could see very different laws from one state to another.
Now, one thing we hear a lot is, why doesn't the US have more than two parties? And isn't that the reason why nothing gets done? So as I kind of explained, a lot of that has to do with those veto points and different things that are built into the American system of government. But really, when you think about it, the United States does have two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. However, within the parties, you definitely have a lot of other different types of Democrats and types of Republicans. And I think it kind of makes sense if you look at, say, a Democrat from, to use our previous example, New York City, they're going to be a bit different than maybe the Democratic senator from West Virginia, who has different constituents, different types of people living in their district, and both, somebody from New York City and somebody from West Virginia can both be Democrats and have the same ideals, values, and believe in the same party, but they may decide to run it a bit differently. Same with Republicans, where you may have somebody who is more into, say, what we would call maybe a country club Republican. So they're more about business and that kind of thing, where you may have other Republican members of Congress that have different values or are more conservative in that culturally conservative way. So, within our two parties, it basically works more like what Denmark has, which is two coalitions.
So as you said, the American system actually isn't that different from the Danish one anymore. Even though there's 12 parties in the Folketing right now, they generally all fall into either the blue bloc on the right or the red bloc on the left. So you end up having a coalition in that way where the various smaller parties all end up supporting a prime minister as it goes into the formal election, and they know that they're going to have at least part of their agenda covered by being part of a broader bloc. Now, this is a thing that's been going on in Danish politics for the last several decades, and it may be upturned a little bit in this election upcoming now, as you certainly have a party from the Lars Løkke moderates that is asking for a government of the middle rather than of the two blocs. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes potentially in this election, or if it's going to be another red bloc, blue bloc election as well.
Yeah, and from our Danish friends and viewers and those of you that we've been able to discuss this with, a lot of people have told us that by Danish standards, this election has really had a lot of drama and been a bit more exciting to watch, and maybe even a bit more like, dare I say it, some US elections get. And the US elections are, well, they're basically what they've always been, a little bit of a circus in some of these Senate races that are coming up. And, they do kind of keep it exciting, although it may horrify some Danes. But if you want to see another video of things that would horrify Danes but are perfectly normal in the United States, you can check out this video right here and watch that one. Thanks for watching with us today, guys. Hi.
Hi.